So why do we learn scales? That's your A major scale. When I first learned that, I was just trying to figure out the mechanics of the guitar. And then I also learned like the minor pentatonic. Also, at a time when I was just trying to learn the mechanics of the guitar. 30 some years later, I'm still learning scales and applying them in different ways. Why do we do that as guitarists? Well, I believe that specifically when we're telling a story through our lead playing, that what we're actually doing is telling a story, and we want to like invoke some feelings. Once you become ingratiated, I don't know if that's the right word. Once you become familiar enough and you have a relationship, like an actual relationship with the note group that is in any given scale, you then understand the feelings that are related to that scale. And we can try to conjure those feelings in our stories by using those scales. Okay, I know that sounded kind of corny, so let's check this out. I got my looper down here, and I'm going to just loop an A major chord. So on top of A major, I've got those two options that I just mentioned, right? I've got your A major scale, which is where a lot of people will go, and a lot of other people would immediately go to the minor pentatonic. So let's see how our vocabulary of just those two scales works on top of the simplest chord, the A major chord. We'll start with the major. That's the diatonic major. Always works. A major chord, A major scale. Who would have thunk it? Let's try the minor pentatonic. So also works, but just gives a completely different feel. So once again, what story am I telling, right? Like, do I want it to be happy? Do I want it to be a little more stink-faced bluesy? So now that we've established that when we're telling a story, our note choice through the scales can help establish the feeling of the story that we're going to tell. If everyone plays the same note groups, those stories are going to be very similar. So very often what we'd like to do is figure out what notes outside of the most usual choices will also work. Let's stick with the pentatonic scale. Usually people also learn the blues scale. And there's only one note difference there. It's flat fifth. So by changing that one note, by adding that one note, how does that change the way that this works? And every time I add a new note or I'm talking about a new scale, I'm going to accentuate that note when doing the example. Still works, but it adds a little bit more of a dimension, right? There's a little bit more interest happening in the story. So let's go back to our major scale. If I want to tell a story in that world, where it's a little bit less like funky and bluesy, but it's a little bit more happy and like, I don't know, I guess maybe joyous. What changes could I try there? Well, I'm in A major, so a couple of the other modes that would work is the Lydian, which also only has one note difference instead of it's, you can think the Simpsons. That's how I always think of Lydian, but that on top of this would sound like this, and again I'm going to accentuate where that note is different. A valid choice. It always feels very like Satriani to me. I don't know how to explain that. I don't mean to talk bad about Satch. Is one of my favorite. Actually, this is a Joe Satriani strap. So let me put that down to the other camera, right? So like, yeah, you know, I love Satch. It's just not really a note choice that I choose very often. It's not a story that I often tell. So instead of that, what works usually for me is the Mixolydian. Maybe Lydian will work for you in most places, but what works for me, if I'm going to tell a story kind of on the joyous and happy side, I'll start with probably the diatonic major or the Mixolydian. Now again, only one note difference. Has that dominant seventh, but that makes an enormous difference in the way that this whole thing feels. So yeah, I love the way that that sounds. It's a great option for anytime we're kind of jamming around in a major key. That could use a little bit more of a jam bandy sound, a little bit more dandelion wine at the festival feel, a little bit less orchestra hall feel by just simply switching that seventh around. And then we can always go to the blues club, right? If we want to get to the pentatonic, so we can actually tell a story now that has multiple dimensions. It's not just happy or bluesy. Maybe it starts out happy and ends bluesy, but in the middle there, we're also using chords, or we're using scales that aren't just your pentatonic, nor your diatonic majors. All right, so let's take a look at adding even a little bit more variety to both of those options that we have. First thing I'm going to do is let's go back to the blues. Usually one of the next notes that I'll add would be the major third. And so I don't remove the minor third. I still play that, but I'll also add the major. And very often I get there by bending the minor third. Or instead of I do. Especially in the context of the bluesy stuff. Sometimes I'll do a hammer on, or even a slide up. See, I did the stank face there because I played the wrong note, but close enough for rock and roll. And then on the Mixolydian side, I'm going to add a flat fifth to that. It gives it a lot of tension and a lot of release when you're playing with that. I'll do the Mixolydian first, and we'll end with bluesy. So that works, and you can see there's a little bit more variety that's happening there. So these two core feelings that I'm going for is like this happy one. It's now become a little bit more playful as I move away from the more formal Ionian, right? Like it's becoming a little bit more playful, and a little bit less formal, but as I'm straying from the standard choice. And the same thing is happening with the blues stuff. It's like it's the blues scale, but adding that major third at the right times and using the right techniques can really make it work. Now the last one is a little bit hidden and underused. I learned it as the Spanish Phrygian. It's also known as this Phrygian dominant. And it always works on top of it. Instead of being like bluesy or joyous or happy, it's really kind of magical and mysterious. So this is one of my favorites, and I use it as often as I can. It's not always appropriate, depending on the sevenths and the ninths that are happening with the other instruments. It can really clash, but when it's right, it really feels good.